It is the start of a new baseball season, which means new cool tools here over at Stokastic.com. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to use the MLB contest generator and the MLB Sims tool to help you make money at baseball this season. If you want to sign up for all the MLB tools that we have here at Stokastic.com, there are links below in the description box that are going to take you to our website, let you sign up for this package. Now, there are a couple of different options for the MLB package. There's the base package and there's the pro package. The main difference in the contest generator is that the base package lets you build up to 500 lineups, whereas the max package lets you build up to 5,000. For this, I'm going to build out 5,000 lineups. And I'm going to click generate lineups here, also showing you some of the other different features that are in here. We've got different slates loaded in. So this is for opening day. There's the main slate, there's the early slate, and there's also the night slate. And then, of course, also, you want to select the correct site that you're playing. If you're playing on DraftKings, select DraftKings. If you're playing on FanDuel, select FanDuel. Also, there are a bunch of different stack exposures within here because there are a lot of different kinds of different lineups you could build for baseball. And also, this is why the contest generator is probably one of the most complex tools we've built here at Stokastic.com, because there are so many different things to consider when baseball lineups are being built out, and there's so much correlation involved in it as well. As you guys will see in the background, the 5,000 lineups that I set it to build, they just finished, but still want to go over these stack settings with you guys. So these are all of the different kinds of stacks that you would possibly want to build for an MLB GPP. And then also some of the lineups are going to show up as unstacked as well if you don't select this to 100%. And you don't want to have 100% stacked lineups in the contest generator. The reason why is because the contest generator, you want it to be matching what the field is expected to do, not necessarily just the lineups that you want to play. And based on our research, about 25% of the field makes unstacked lineups. So you're going to get the most accurate results possible when simulating the slate by building out some lineups that are unstacked, even though we all know that it's generally not optimal to play unstacked MLB lineups. As far as the different stack types, we've got 5-3, 5-2-1, 5X. So that could be like a 5-1-1, just 5, and then any players from other teams added in. 4-4, 4-3-1, 4-2X, 4X, 3-3X. And there's also comparable stacking options over for FanDuel, just a little bit different because the most players you could stack from a team on FanDuel is 4 and not 5. And then keep in mind, too, this is the batters. It doesn't include the pitchers. Pitchers, they don't count as part of your hitter stacks. So these are the default settings that we have found are most accurately to match the field. But if you disagree for a specific slate, if you think the field is going to do something different, you could change these numbers. And you could say that you want, say, 25% 5-3 stacks, for instance, something along those lines. But keep in mind that if you make any changes to this and you've already built out your contest pool, you're going to want to rerun it because you need to rerun the pool for it to take into account any changes that you made. One other thing that's going to be a little bit different about baseball relative to something like basketball, due to all of the correlation and the amount of complexities there are in the contest generator, you may occasionally see that certain players will be a little bit lesser owned than what their ownership projection is. So one thing I do recommend you do is just go through this and see if there's any players individually that are projected for a lot more, a lot less ownership than you think they should be. And then you could boost their ownerships and then rerun lineups, and that'll give you another pool that will be maybe a little bit more accurate to what it is that you want it to build out. So here, for instance, Tyreek Skubal project for 32% ownership. He showed up in 24% of lineups. So I might want to go in here and boost his ownership by 3 arrows here. And then when I regenerate lineups, it's going to give me another set of lineups that will give me a little bit more of Tyreek Skubal. So that's something that for baseball, a little bit more important to do than something, say, like basketball, where it's a lot easier to just get the pool settings as is to match what the field is expected to do. And then also keep in mind that if you made any changes to the stack exposures here, like the little bit of a change that I gave to the 5-3 stacks, that's also going to show up in these lineups when they're done being run, as well as any other changes that you make in here. And yeah, once again, if you do want to make lineups that are 100% stacked, I don't recommend you do that, but that is an option for you if you want to go and change this and set it all the way up to 100% total, and that'll make 0 unstacked lineups. Now, if you go in here also, you could check the stack settings of all the lineups that have been built out here, and it's going to show you the difference between your desired exposure of those stacks and what it actually was. And this is generally going to be very, very close. So like the unstacked lineups that we had set to 25%, came out to 25.7, and you'll see that across all the different stack types here. So just something else interesting to see what it is that the contest generator gives you. And then you'll see after the alterations I made here at Tyreek Skubal, now his pool exposure is almost directly in line with the ownership, where now it's 33.1% to 32.2. So now after you finish playing around with the contest generator, one other thing you could do is if you don't want to simulate the slate, maybe you just want to upload these lineups directly you've built in here, you could rank them based on projections and ownership. You could export them and then upload them directly to DraftKings or FanDuel. But not something I like to do. I like to simulate the slate and use the Sims portion. And now here's what you're going to want to do on this page. You'll see that the lineups that we built in the contest generator, and here they are automatically uploaded from the other page. And now, once again, make sure you have the right site selected that you're playing on. So if you built lineups for DraftKings, make sure that DraftKings is selected. If you built lineups for FanDuel, make sure that FanDuel is selected. So FanDuel or DraftKings. And the lineups are back. Kind of threw it off by toggling back and forth when I'd already had FanDuel selected. Also, why it's important to have the right site selected, because if you select FanDuel and you build DraftKings lineups, they're not going to match up. Also, same deal. Make sure you have the right slate selected in addition to the right site. And then also your percentage payout to first. So these lineups that I built out here, I'm going to be playing in the flagship contest on DraftKings for opening day, which is a $500,000 total prize pool. It pays out $100,000 to first. $100,000 is 20% of $500,000. So I'm going to select 20% to first for the purpose of the simulation. Now I'm using the default Stokastic projections, but if you do want to upload your own projections, pretty easy. Just select the upload custom projections box right here, and then you're going to either download our template and you could copy and paste your projections into the template, or you could simply upload a CSV with 3 different headers on it. One column labeled player name, that's going to be the name of the player. One column labeled ownership, that's going to be your projected ownership for the player, which that's really more for aesthetic purposes. It's actually going to be the contest pool we generated that dictates what the ownership in that pool is. But if you want to see what your projected ownership is on page, you could upload that directly here as well. And then, of course, the projection. So another column that just says projection, and then all the player projections in there. And if you have that CSV, you upload it directly to here, and that'll change all the fantasy points, the ownership, and all those sorts of things. Now, if you want to just make some quick alterations to players, you can do that in here as well. So let's say that you want Tyler Glasnow to be projected for 22 fantasy points instead of 20.29. You type in 22, and then when you simulate the slate, that's going to assume what his projected fantasy points are. But if you make any change, you want to roll it back, you can just press this button and it'll go back to our default projections. You can also do some quick changes by pressing the plus and the minus arrows. That'll change the fantasy point projection by 1 or 2 fantasy points. Now, after you've set all of those different things in line that you want, the projections and all of that, if you just want to use our default projections, which is going to be the easiest, then you are ready to press run contest simulation. And then once again, just make sure that you have the right site and slate and all of that selected. Now, what is happening when we're simulating out the slate here is on a pitch by pitch basis. So like batter for batter, the slate is being simulated out 40,000 times in a tournament setting. So what this is going to allow the Sims tool to do is all those lineups we built in the contest generator, they are playing against each other 40,000 times. And when the sim is done being run, that's going to then rank our lineups by the highest simulated projected ROI of all those lineups. And this is also where the percentage to first payout really does matter, because if you're playing in a contest that say is 30% to first, well, then it's a little bit more top-heavy payout, and the Sims might indicate that contrarian lineups are a little bit more beneficial. Maybe leverage is more important for a particular slate on a really top-heavy payout, where you need to beat out so many more lineups to get that top prize, whereas something where it's 5% to first, well, then it's a little bit flatter, and you don't necessarily have to only build lineups that are playing for first place. So depending on what contest you're playing in, the percentage to first setting, it is going to alter the results of some of the Sims. So make sure that you have the correct percentage to first payout selected, and it's very easy to calculate. Just look at the overall prize pool on DraftKings or FanDuel, whatever site you're playing on, look at the percentage to first, and then you just divide the percentage to first by the total prize pool. That's going to give you a percentage of what the total percentage to first is, and that's what you want to select here. Now, in just about a second here, we're going to see the simulation done being run, which is happening right now. And automatically, your lineups are going to be sorted by a projected simulated ROI. Now, the simulated ROI, this is the projected return on each of those individual lineups. And right here, I'm going to select the top 150 lineups. And the reason you want to sort them by simulated ROI is because this is the all-encompassing metric that takes everything into account in these lineups. So things like how often the lineup wins, how often it cashes, how often it finishes in the top 10% of a tournament, that's all captured in the simulated ROI. If you only sorted by something like cash percentage, you might have lineups that have a higher percentage chance to cash, but maybe they're not as live to finish in first. And then in some of those simulation runs where maybe they were just only min cash lineups, that's why the simulated ROI might be a little bit lower for those individual lineups. So the way that I think it is best to sort your lineups is by that simulated ROI metric. All these other columns here, here's what it's showing you. Projected fantasy points, pretty straightforward. That's how many fantasy points that each lineup is projected to score. Ownership sum, that is the total ownership of all the players in that lineup. Stack, these are the teams that are stacking in these lineups. So Houston, Washington, Yankees, Twins. Stack type, 4-3, 5-3, 5-2, just the amount of players from each team that are in those lineups. Then we've got the win percentage, top 10 percentage, cash percentage, and then dupes. This is something that really comes into play on smaller baseball slates where there could be overlap in lineups where maybe the field is playing a lineup, 10, 15 times or something like that. And it doesn't matter as much for the opening day slate where there's a bunch of games on the slate, but for a 2-3 game baseball slate, it is really important to have some unique lineups. And what's great about us projecting dupes is then we'll know in the simulated ROI how much those dupes are impacting how profitable lineups are expected to be. This is how much salary each lineup used. And then the lineups here, these are just the players in those individual lineups. Now let's go through some of the other tabs here where you could see some of the other information you can get out of the Sims tool. On the player ROI tab, this is all of the individual players that are in the player pool for the day, their salary, their average simulated ROI, and their projected fantasy points. So you can see which individual players ended up being the most profitable amongst all of the lineups that we ran. Stack ROI, this is going to show you all of the different stack types that we built. So the different 3-man stacks, the different 4-man stacks, the different 5-man stacks. It'll give you some information on how profitable those individual stacks were. So, for instance, the most profitable 3-man stack in this sim run was the Washington Nationals. They were also the most profitable 4-man stack. As far as 5-man stacks, still profitable to Washington Nationals, but not quite as profitable as some of these other teams. So just kind of an interesting way to look at the slate and which stacks ended up being the most profitable in simulations. Favorites, this is just going to show you the top 150 lineups that we favored. And then my favorite tab to look at are exposures tabs. This is going to let us know which players did we actually get the most exposure to in our top 150 lineups, or if you're favoriting something like 20 lineups, the top 20 players that you had the most exposure to. But also, you could alter some of your lineups in here. This is another way you could customize your lineups, and we'll go over that in a second. But first, once again, you can see the simulated player ROI, the exposure. So the player I got the most of in this run is Tyler Glasnow. He's in 63.3% of my lineups, making him my most exposed pitcher and player overall. Projected fantasy points for each player, the pool ownership. So this is what their projected ownership was in the contest generator run that we did. And then the leverage, this is simply going to be the difference between the pool ownership and the exposure. So somebody like Tyler Glasnow, who ended up being in 27.5% of the pool lineups and then 63.3% of my actual lineups, the leverage is 35.5%. Just the difference between the two lets us know that we're overweight to the field on Glasnow. And you could also sort by this as well. So if you want to see which players overall you have the most exposure to relative to the field. And no real surprise here, because if you guys remember how highly positive ROI the Washington Nationals were as a stack, you'll see here that we ended up with a good amount of Washington Nationals. So the Sims determined on that run that, hey, Nationals, this is an underlooked team. Or I should say overlooked team. The field isn't getting to as much as they should. And it really jammed the Nationals for me. So what is this? 4 of my top 5 most rostered players and my 4 most rostered hitters, at least relative to being overweight on leverage, are coming to us from the Washington Nationals. And then you could also sort this to see which players you're underweight to. So on this run, you'd be underweight to guys like Tyreek Skubal, Logan Webb. So therefore, you'd be rooting against them in this set of lineups. Now, you could also look at your stack exposures and you could see what you ultimately ended up with for your different 3, 4, and 5-man stack exposures to each individual team. And no real surprise considering we already know the player ownership, got to a lot of the Nationals here. So they are overall accounting for, 36, about 50% of the stacks that I have in this sim run our Washington Nationals. Now, how do you customize this? Right? Because maybe you guys saw all the exposure we got to the Washington Nationals, and maybe you're not comfortable with that. You don't want it. Well, you could go and sort here by Washington. It would help if I spelled Washington correct. WSH, and they're right here as well. And then you could just go and you could say, hey, I don't want this much exposure to Washington. I want to give them a negative ROI boost to make them show up less frequently. Well, then you could do negative 15%. You could boost them. And then when you go to the lineups and you unfavorite and then refavorite them, top 150, you're going to see that we now have less exposure to the Nationals as a team. They were before in about 50% of lineups, whereas now we've got about 24% exposure to the Washington Nationals just by doing a blanket ROI negative downgrade boost to the team as a stack. And if you want to clear the boost, you could do that as well. If you want to upgrade a team that you aren't getting as much of as maybe you would like to, you do the same deal in inverse where you go to the Houston Astros, for instance, and you give them a positive ROI boost of 10%, and that would make them show up in more lineups. You could also do the same deal for individual players, where let's say that Tyler Glasnow showed up in 61% of lineups. Maybe that's too much exposure to Tyler Glasnow for you. You want to downgrade him. We'll do the inverse because we already did a downgrade to another team. Let's upgrade somebody. Let's give Jesus Luzardo a 15% ROI boost and boost him. Remember, he was in 35% of lineups. Now we're going to unfavorite the top 150, refavorite them, and now our exposures have 59% of Jesus Luzardo. And then once again, if you want to clear the boost, you could clear it. And then whenever you change any kind of boost, remember that you have to unfavorite then refavorite your top 150 lineups. What the boost is doing is it is going to take every single lineup with that individual player or team you change. So Jesus Luzardo, for instance, every single lineup with Jesus Luzardo got a 15% ROI boost when we gave him that 15% boost. So it makes it so when you refavor your top 150 lineups, more of those are inclined to be Jesus Luzardo lineups. Something else you could do in here, which is going to make it easy to change some of your exposures to players, is an exposure cap. So see, we currently have Tyler Glasnow in 63% of lineups, but maybe you decide that you only want 40% of Glasnow. That's the most you want. You're not comfortable with 60%, 40%, that's the most you're willing to go to. So you could go 40% as a max exposure to Tyler Glasnow, click set exposures and adjust favorites, and this is automatically going to select at max 40% of Tyler Glasnow lineups. Then you'll see if you go to our exposures tab, we now have in our top 150 lineups exactly 40% of Tyler Glasnow because that's where it maxed him out. So that's another way too that you just quickly cap some of your exposure. And you can do that to as many players as you want. So we already did that with Glasnow here at 40%. Maybe now you want to say, well, I only want 30% of Jesus Luzardo. You can do the same deal. Go to Jesus Luzardo, select 30%, and it's going to readjust your lineups. Now you'll see we still have the 40% of Tyler Glasnow, and now Luzardo, he's been capped in 30% of our lineups. So this is how you use the Sims tool and also how you can manipulate some of your lineups. There's a lot of options to change the correlations of players using the stack boost. You can change the individual player exposures. And yeah, it should be a really fun way to build out MLB lineups. This is a very complex tool on the back end, but it isn't on the front end. It's easy for you to use. So all the math that goes on in the backside of it, you could really have it all done in a minute if you wanted to, just by clicking the simulation button. You can do another minute to build out the contest in the contest pool and the contest generator. So if you didn't want to make any kind of adjustments, you could build out an entire set of 150 lineups and then simulate that 150 set of lineups in just a couple of minutes. So I hope you guys found this information useful. If you want to sign up for this tool, sign up using the link that we have below. And if you have any questions at all, hit me up in Discord or leave a question below in the comment section here. I'm always available in Discord. One of the perks of being a Stokastic member is every single package we have on the site includes access to Discord. So you get access to customer support, as well as all the analysts and all the data people we have on team. You can ask them questions whenever you want. So thank you guys very much for watching. If you haven't done yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Good luck, and let's have a great baseball season.